1. My mother grew up in a very small town. In Denmark we usually say, 3 houses and a shithole about these small towns. She would take the bus to a bigger town. When she was 16, she was one evening walking to the bus station to get back home. A young man came up to her and asked her for the time. She looked down at her watch, and then he just grabbed her arm and started dragging her along with him without saying a word. Of course my mom screamed and put up a fight, and she managed to pull her arm free. She ran as fast as she could to the bus station and he chased her. She was faster, so he didn't see which bus she ran into. She hid inside the bus. When she tried looking out the window, she could see him walking around at the bus station in search of her. She hid again and stayed down until the bus closed the door and started moving. 2. This happened back in 1995 on July 28th. I was 14 at the time, and I still remember my father coming home, starting telling us what just happened. He had been down at a tank station. Back then, half the station belonged to a mechanic that my father knew, so he went into his shop to say hi. The owner asked, "Can you please talk to Jan? He's outside, and I think he's having a mental breakdown." My father hurried out. His brother's name was Jan, and he thought it was his brother out there. However, it was another Jan who worked at the mechanic. My father sat down beside him, and Jan started talking. He had just been out, testing a car he had repaired, when he came by a car accident. The man who had been driving had come out of the car. The car was in flames and a woman was screaming from the back seat. But no one had been able to get the door open. Jan was a big, strong guy, so he simply pulled a Hulk-like maneuver. He could get his hands up under the list by the window. I'm so sorry if the list has a name in English. I don't know that name. And simply used his strength to pull the entire door off. He got the woman out and threw her and himself down the road when the car exploded. The woman was rescued, but then he learned what made him break down. There was a 15-month-old girl in the back seat as well. In his mind, he thought he would have been able to save the girl as well if only he had known she was there. But there was no way. He would have died within that short time frame between saving the woman and the car exploding. 3. When I was a 6-year-old girl, something happened to me that almost defined me. It affected me so much. It made me a believer in the paranormal, and that belief is extremely solid. So here's what happened, and you can tell me whether it was an alien, or a shadow person, or whatever. I was sleeping in my bed, and I woke up to see something sitting on my shelf in my closet. The closet was one of those ones with slatted double folding doors, ironically like the ones in E.T. I would normally have had them shut, and the light on so that it could shine out, like a nightlight, but it had burnt out. It's ironic because what I saw sitting there really took on the shape of a creature kind of like E.T. It had kind of the same shaped head and body. E.T. has such a unique body and head shape that I have to think now that I mention it, that it was a demon fucking with me because E.T. scared me, even though when I was younger, I was sure it was an alien. There was no doubt in my mind. But anyway, this shelf was really a desk. It had a very wide surface, and the creature sitting there was only about 2.5 feet tall. It was pitch black, and I could not make out any features. It was just facing me. I froze when I saw it, and the most intense, incredible fear I have ever experienced in my life washed over me like a bucket of ice water. It was fucking horrific to experience fear like that. I laid there for what felt like hours, but it was probably half an hour. I had tried covering my face with the sheets, but I would get so curious to see if it was still there so quickly. I'd wind up looking at it again and again. Still there every time. It was a creature in my closet. I figured it would disappear, but it just wouldn't. I wanted to get out of there, but the closet was on the same wall as my door, and this meant having to get closer to it in order to get out. But that's what I did, and working up the courage to do that took a very, very long time. When I finally made it out of the room, I tiptoed down the hall to my parents' bedroom and tried to wake my mom up. I don't get why she wouldn't wake up, it's really not like her, but she refused me, telling me to go back to bed. There is nothing there. I assured her there was a creature in my closet as many times as she would tolerate before she got really pissed. She said, "I am not getting up for this, Natalie," and that was it. I stood there by her bedside a long, long time after that. I remember my knees creaking as I stood there, still but swaying a little. I eventually laid down on her floor next to the bed, but it was undoable. I could not sleep at all, and the more and more time that passed, the more unbelievable the whole situation became. I was starting to doubt what I had seen. What I couldn't imagine happening is that it was still there. There had been absolutely no sound coming from the direction of my room all night, and I eventually made up my mind to go back. The rest of the house was far too scary at night, and I felt so uncomfortable on the floor in my parents' room. Not purely physical either, it felt weird lying on the wood in there. I banked on the fact that whatever it was I had seen was gone by now, which was stupid, but oh well. I went back to my bed and got under the covers, not looking back at the closet. Finally, I poked my head out of the blankets enough to see the closet, and what do you know? The fucking thing was still sitting there, still staring at me. I could feel its stare, but I could not see its eyes still. I just gave up and stayed completely under the covers. Next thing I know, it's morning and my mom is in my room waking me up. The first thing she says is, "See, you still think there's a creature in your closet?" And she motions towards the completely empty shelf. I was at a loss for words. I told her how terrified I had been at this thing, and I have made her life a living hell about it ever since. I mean, I am 34 now, with a 10-year-old son, so I feel for her now when I remember all the times I came to her, tearfully recalling the terror I experienced that night. I was scarred for life, but she was normally so good about being really accommodating to me. She doesn't need to hear about the one time she fucked up over and over. So now that I have recently read quite a lot of things about demons and shadow people, I think it could have been something like that. But I mean, until I started writing this, I've always referred to it in my head as an alien. The only other paranormal thing that I have ever seen since then is a spaceship. About treetop height, right above the car me and a guy were in, when we were driving through farmland pretty late at night. It zoomed across an entire field completely soundlessly, and so fast, it was like it was on a laser pointer. Just flick, bam, across the field. The guy and I stopped and looked at it, losing our minds. It was the coolest thing we had ever seen. Then, after hovering there for less than a minute, it zoomed off so fast up into space, just like in the movies. I really do mean it looked like it was controlled by someone with a laser pointer. It was so quiet and so fast. Looking back on this, I become a little creeped out because it wasn't until a couple years ago that I realized that it had been above our car on purpose to check us out. We were the only moving thing for miles. There were like no other cars out. I hadn't realized this right away. I just thought we had been in the right spot at the right time to see it. So that trips me out a little. I remember checking to see if we had experienced any missing time. And we didn't, everything was fine. If you want to know what it looked like, they had a spaceship in the TV series Fargo. In a scene where Kirsten Dunst was running with one of the characters, and he becomes alarmed at this spaceship that's above them, and she says, "Oh, that's just a flying saucer." The one in that show is to the T what the one I saw was like. Huge lights underneath it, like burning cylinders, 3 of them. I remember seeing these. That's all I could see when it was above the car. Then, when it was hovering across the field, it just looked like a round, flying saucer, probably big enough to seat a few men. It was somewhat small, maybe the size of a kid's bedroom. Anyway, that's my dealings with the paranormal. I really think life is a lot more fun knowing there is more out there than meets the eye. The way that spaceship moved defied physics. So I have kind of a theory and a saying about that. Physics is for the physical. We are 3-dimensional beings and we must obey those laws. But aliens are probably some kind of 4th-dimensional beings or 5th or whatever. And they can travel through space and time freely. That's what I think. 4. I was living with my boyfriend in the house that he grew up in upstate Maryland. This is how the layout of the house goes. The basement stairs lead up to the small kitchen just to the right. Just outside the kitchen is an equally small dining room, and that opens into the living room. On the right, in the living room, were the stairs to the upper level. On the 2nd floor, there were 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. The experiences started off small but still creeped me out. I would be in the basement doing laundry when I would get the feeling of being watched. It was a disturbing feeling. One night I was in the kitchen making supper for my boyfriend and me. It was late at night. I stood with my back to the dining room and living room facing the stove. All of a sudden I felt like somebody stood behind me, then took their finger and wiped it across the back of my neck. I jumped and turned and no one was there, and hollered, "Hey!" And he hollered back, "Hey what?" from the living room. He was not in the room with me. I was like, what the hell? But I chalked it up to, maybe it's just me. Maybe I just imagined it. Another time it was like 3 or 4 a.m. He and I were sleeping downstairs on the fold-out couch bed. We heard 2 loud bangs. It sounded like 2 shotgun blasts. We woke up immediately to see a bright as hell purple orb just floating from the kitchen and dining room area. It was the size of a basketball. There was no sound as it then floated across the living room towards us, then went through the wall above our heads, and was gone. One time I was in the shower, in the upstairs bathroom. I heard the bathroom door open and close. I thought it was my boyfriend, so I called out to him, "Hey, you coming to take a shower with me?" There was no answer from him. I knew what I heard, so I opened the shower curtain and looked out. There was no one there. I panicked and got the fuck out. My boyfriend was downstairs the whole time watching TV. Then the experiences start getting worse. I was in the basement, as always feeling like I was being watched. But it felt as though somehow the stare was getting more intense, like it was getting closer to me. I was extremely scared. It was so uncomfortable that I was about to leave the laundry till another time. Then I felt a breath across the back of my neck. So I headed for the stairs, but I felt certain that something was following me. Then I ran up the stairs to the kitchen and through the dining room and living room to the stairs that led to the upper level of the house. Menacing isn't a good enough definition to describe the sensation coming from whatever it was that was following me. It felt malevolent, like it meant to do me harm. I looked back. There stood a dark shadow in the shape of a big man. There were no lights on in the kitchen, dining room, or living room. This thing was darker than the dark surrounding it. Its feet were at least a foot off of the ground. But it's the way it was moving that terrified me to my very core. Its arms and legs were twisting and turning. It did not move smoothly like in fluid movements. It moved in a jerky yet rhythmic way, bending back and forth at odd angles. It hurt my eyes to watch it move in this unnatural way. Still, I said nothing to anyone about this. Who wants to sound crazy, right? About a week later, my boyfriend and I were sleeping in our bedroom, and we always slept with our backs together. I was on the left side and he was on the right. I was sleeping on my right side, with my right hand beneath my head. Out of nowhere, a hand that was colder than sub-zero temperatures grabbed me by my left hand and dragged me over to the edge of the bed. I woke up in a terrified and panicked state. I got up and began to turn on all the lights and TV. I turned to wake my boyfriend, but when I looked at his face, it was unreal. His face seemed as though the bones under his skin were contorting. His face was twisting into possessed-looking shapes and forms. He would not wake up. I went into the bathroom and looked at my arm. It was burning and stinging. There was a clear, angry red handprint on my arm where I had been grabbed. I went back into the bedroom and tried to wake him up again. This time he did wake up. I finally told him of all my experiences. He freaked out, but would not say why. His mom came to visit the next day. As we were all sitting and visiting, he asked her if she remembered what he told her he'd seen in the hallway of the bedrooms when he was 15. She said yes. So he asked her to tell me what he'd said. She then described to me the same darker-than-dark shadow thing that had followed me up from the basement to the stairs in the living room that one night. While this did nothing to dampen the horrifying sensations I had experienced in this house, I at least felt like my story had been validated, and that I was not the only one to feel these things. I was not crazy. He was a Christian, and had his pastor come to do a blessing and anoint the doors with holy water and oils. There didn't seem to be any more activity after that. I soon left that house, and have never been back. 5. A little background. We lived with my grandparents until I was about 9 or 10 years old, until my mom remarried. When she married my stepdad, we moved in with him to New Mexico, where he was stationed in the Air Force. Things were great. For the first time, I had my own bedroom and bathroom. The house was enormous. Our new living room was easily 3 times the size of my grandparents' living room, and the laundry room was the size of a large bedroom. The base housing we were placed in had 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, which was a little odd since we only had 4 people living at the house, and base housing doesn't normally give families more rooms than needed. We thought it was a little odd, but we just figured we had a run of good luck for once. We moved in and everything was going well. My mom promised when we moved that she would buy me a puppy since I wasn't allowed to have one at my grandparents' house. I was gifted a tiny red poodle puppy that I promptly named Ginger. My stepdad was a dog handler with the Air Force, so we also had an assortment of German Shepherds and Belgian Malinois in the house at any given time. We believed that we were safe with our dogs, alarm system, and safe neighborhood, but we were very wrong. One day I got home from school and my mom left me alone while she took my brother to baseball practice. I walked into the house, turned off the alarm, and sat in front of the TV with Ginger and shared a sandwich with her. Our alarm system was one that had cameras in all the main living areas, laundry room, garage, backyard, and kitchen. The cameras constantly recorded images and panned through the different rooms, and showed them in the upper left-hand corner of the TV, no matter what channel you were watching. While tearing my sandwich in half to give it to the dog, I noticed the camera showing the door from the laundry room to the garage. slowly open. I didn't give it much thought, and walked into the laundry room to shut the door. I suddenly jumped when I realized one of my dad's German shepherds was in the laundry room, crouched under a counter used for folding clothes, and growling in the most menacing way at me. I didn't know she was in the house, and as I stood there I realized it wasn't me she was growling at. It was the door I had came in to shut. I left the room after shutting the door, wondering how the wind blew the door open since the garage door was shut, ensuring very little wind could get in. Later that night I told my stepdad about Sadie, the German shepherd, and how odd she had acted. He laughed and said she was just senile, as she likely didn't know what she was growling at, as she was deaf and blind in her old age. I laughed it off, and went to bed with Ginger on my bed. A few hours later, I woke up covered in urine. Ginger was by my head, shaking like a leaf, and she had wet herself. I groaned and placed her on the floor so I could pull the sheets off the bed. My TV had been on low since I cannot sleep without some background noise, and that's when I glanced up and saw something moving on the security camera. I opened my door and started down the short hallway when I noticed Kaiser and Creed, two of my dad's work dogs, stalking something. They glanced at me and continued down the narrow hallway, stalking whatever it was they saw. So I followed behind while wondering if they were following the shadow I had noticed on the TV. I assumed the shadow was my mom or dad, and that the dogs hadn't noticed, so were going to check it out. From the corner of the living room I heard a dog's collar jingle, and I realized that Sadie must have been alerted to what the other dogs had seen. The next thing I know, there was a crash in the kitchen leading to the laundry room, and snarling, snapping, and barking in the most menacing bark all three dogs could muster. All three dogs looked almost rabid, while they attacked something just out of my line of sight. I flipped the light on and realized the door to the garage was open once again, and there was a small amount of blood on the door frame. I panicked, thinking that one of the big dogs had attacked Ginger, when startled by whatever they saw or sensed. My mom and dad bolted into the laundry room, looking for the source of the commotion. My dad noticed the blood and immediately began checking each dog to see who had been injured, but none of them had any cuts or bites on them. I ran to look for Ginger, and she was still in my room, hiding under the bed, and had never been in the laundry room, so it wasn't her blood. We never learned where the blood on the doorframe came from, but it wasn't from any of us. Later, I learned that the man that had previously lived in the home had committed suicide by hanging himself from the metal beam of the garage door. Apparently, when his wife found him, he had deep scratches on his face and neck from trying to claw at the rope used to hang himself with. He must have panicked and tried to loosen the rope before eventually dying from his injuries. There were a few families that had moved into our house before us, but moved out a couple weeks later when they began to experience strange things in the laundry room garage. When we moved into the house, they had made a point not to tell us what had happened, fearing we would leave. The death in the house was the only reason we were able to get such a large home. No one else wanted it. We had numerous similar experiences in the months following. Drawers in the laundry room would mysteriously open. The video alarm system would get stuck on the image of the laundry room while panning through rooms, and the dogs eventually had to be placed on Prozac because of how agitated they had become. These dogs each weighed over 120 pounds, had extensive Schutzhund attack training, and had done tours in Kuwait, Afghanistan, Iraq, where they were placed in constant danger due to the ongoing wars. They never became depressed or anxious until we moved into that house. Once Sadie died, Kaiser and Creed were medically retired and became our beloved pets. My dad was moving his car out of the garage one morning before work when suddenly the door came crashing down and destroyed the car. My dad survived the incident only because he had got out of the car to kick a couple of dog toys out of the way so he wouldn't run them over. The door would have killed him had he been in the car. And when the garage door company came to look at the door, they couldn't find a reason for why it fell. The chain rollers and locking mechanism were intact, and they couldn't determine what caused it to suddenly give. We moved within 6 months and never had issues once we left. I'm not one to believe in paranormal stories or ghosts, but once this happened, I became a believer and know that there is something more to the world than just the things we can see. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Scary Subscriber Stories, episode 14. As I have been doing, I will just remind you to check that the channel you are watching this on is Hellfreezer. I am not affiliated with any other channels in any way. No other channel has permission to repost my work. The name of the channel is Hellfreezer, the address is King of the Cities, and that should be where you're finding this video. If you are not, then you're not on my channel. Okay, that being said, on with the rest of the outro. Thank you very much to all my subscribers who sent in their stories. The first couple of stories were by the same subscriber, and I actually have 2 more of those that will feature in another video. I didn't want to use them all up at once. And, oh, great, there's currently a fly bothering me. Go away, Mr. Fly. Or Miss Fly, I don't know, I didn't stop to check. Start your own YouTube channel. This is mine, stay away from the microphone. Okay, just a quick update on where we are this week. Let's see, this will be Tuesday. Tomorrow you will have True Scary Stories. Thursday, we're good to go for a glitch video. Friday, plenty of paranormal stories were already set for that. And I don't have enough TIFUs yet, but I do have a week to try and get them. So cross all your fingers and toes and try not to fall over, because that would be unfortunate. And I should be able to get a TIFU ready. And with that, I think I'm going to leave you for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.